Okay, today we're going to talk about how to render images in Fusion 360. So right here I've got three objects. One that's a box with some planar faces, and I've got a sphere and a torus so that we can see how the render quality looks different on different curvatures and surfaces. So first step is, once you have your model the way you want it, just go on over to the render drop down. And inside the render drop down, the options are pretty simple. So we're going to be messing with basically these three things right here, and then we'll do a render. First step is, like I always say, work your way from left to right in the Fusion menu. So we're going to pick an appearance. This is where you get to choose what kind of materials go on your different objects, so you can make them look like metal or fabric or wood or painted surfaces, whatever. So we've got a few different options up here. One, you can apply the material to the entire component, or you can apply a material just to a face. So like on the box here, I could have a painted surface for one side, and then for a different face I could make it look like wood, and so on. So you can actually, if you have a very complex object, you can put different materials on different faces. So that's really cool. All the materials that you've used so far in this design are going to be listed right here, so you can reuse them, and it's a simple drag and drop interface. So the library comes with a bunch of stuff. You can search in the little box here. Like if I want to find something that's blue, I can just type in blue and I get all the options of blue. So glass, paint, metallic paint, fabric, powder coat. So some of these, if you see that little down arrow right there, it means you have to actually download that material from the Autodesk servers. If it doesn't have that icon, that means you already have it on your computer and you can use it right now. These don't cost money, so it's no big deal. You just have to hit download and wait a few seconds. I kind of like the look of this powder coat rough blue, so I'm going to hit download right there. And you'll see it actually downloads really quick. It's not a big file. Now once I have it, I'm just going to drag it onto the object that I want. And since I do have bodies and components selected up here, it's just going to drag it to the entire body. So I don't actually have any components in this scene. So you can already see it's giving us kind of a preview of the rough surface there. Zoom in and take a look at it. You can see that it actually has some roughness to it, so that's really cool. Let's find some other designs here. I want to do like an aluminum for the torus back here. They have all kinds of different aluminums. We've got different color of anodized aluminums. We've got polished, bead blasted, satin finish, mirror finish, different brushed metals. We even have the diamond plate, so like the stair steps on a semi-truck, that kind of thing. Aluminum mesh, this has like little holes in it. So all of these are actually pretty cool. I like the look of their aluminum materials. I'm going to go with a polished because I want to see some good reflections in this one. Now notice we are getting kind of a simple preview right here. We aren't seeing things like the ball being reflected in the torus yet. When we actually go to render, we will see that. So this is still just kind of a preview quality. All right, I want to do one last thing. I want to find some sort of a wood for this because it looks like a 2x4. 2x4s are often made of pine, so I'm going to drag pine right over here. Okay, let's close this for just a moment while we take a look around here. So one thing that we're noticing right off the bat is if this was a 2x4, the wood grain is actually going the wrong direction. So that's not going to work for me. We've got wood grain going up this way, wood grain going up that way, across this way. It should be running the length of the board. So if you've ever held a 2x4 in your hands, you would notice that right off the bat. So we'll fix that in a moment. Let's go ahead, since we're done with appearance, let's go to the next icon, scene settings. So this is the same kind of idea, except for this is dealing with the background here and the lighting. So we can change the brightness here. Let's not mess with that for right now. That should be kind of a final tweaking at the end if you need to. Position, this lets you rotate the stage. So just imagine that your objects are sitting in the middle of like a stage in a photo studio, and you can rotate the entire studio around your objects instead of rotating your objects inside the studio. So you can get the lighting that you want just by spinning the world around. And I kind of like a little bit of rim light back here, and a nice little high key on the side there. So I'm going to spin it about like that. I also like the fact that the shadows are going behind the objects instead of in front. I think that's kind of a bizarre look. Background. We can do solid color or environment. This is where you can actually show the photo studio itself. We can also put in images back there. Let's do solid color for right now. And I do want to lighten this up a little bit. Make it not quite pure white, but close. Let's get rid of that position. Okay. Ground plane. So this is simply, do we want a ground to show up? Do we want shadows and all that stuff? You would turn this off if you're planning on taking this into Photoshop and cutting your objects out and pasting them into another photo. That would make things a whole lot easier. If you want this to be part of your render, then I would recommend turning ground plane on so that you get shadows. The ground isn't exactly flat. If we take a look at our environment here, you can see that the ground actually slopes up a bit. But if we hit flatten ground, it's going to flatten everything to the highest point. So I'm actually not going to do that because I like the look of that sloped background. And reflections. This makes the floor shiny. And I'm going to turn that back to solid color. So if you remember all the old Apple product shots, they used to always have like an iPad or an iPod sitting there with a reflection down below it. This is an easy way to just kind of turn that on. You can turn up the roughness of it, meaning it's not quite a perfect mirror. It's more like a shiny surface. If you turn it all the way down, it's going to be more like a perfect mirror. So I actually don't want that in my render. And the camera. So hopefully you know the difference between orthographic and perspective. But the long and short of it is perspective shows depth properly and orthographic does not. So I'll show you the difference. Orthographic, the front of this 2x4 is going to be exactly the same as the back of this 2x4 if you were able to see right through it. If I turn on perspective, now it is not the same. This is actually a little bit bigger because this shrinks down. So this box that's back here is actually way smaller than this box because these lines converge back to a point. So let's just toggle that back and forth for a second. These are like perfect shapes with no depth, and these have depth. Maybe we can do like this and show you. So notice that these lines taper back like this. We see the depth because it's perspective. If we go to orthographic, it looks very unnatural. And it's made so that the front and back faces are identical. So it's a very bizarre look, very unnatural. And this is kind of a mix between the two. So it keeps the faces nice and orthographic, but it does taper the trailing edges there. So I'm gonna keep it on perspective. Actually, this one is made for, like, if you go to the front view, it snaps into an orthographic, and then if you go to like a perspective view, then it looks more perspective. So I'm gonna go to perspective, just keep it like that because that's how the human eye sees, and that's actually how a camera looks at things too. So let's keep that. Focal length, this is basically picking a lens for your camera. So all the way up means that you're taking a lot of the perspective out of the picture, and all the way down turns it into more of a fisheye look. So you get way more perspective. Look at that 2x4 right there. Really tapers back now because it's a fisheye lens. So generally for portrait shots, you want to be somewhere between 55 and 80-ish. And then anything above that is going to be considered a zoom lens. So if we go down to something more like 40, we're going to get a lot of perspective, but it's not going to be like crazy looking. I kind of like that look. I don't know, maybe that's a little bit much. Let's go to like 50. We'll keep it a little bit wide. Okay, exposure. That should be self-explanatory. It's just simply how much light you're letting into the fake lens. And depth of field. This is going to, it's going to give you a warning that it's only visible when ray tracing is enabled, and you're not going to see it in the shot, but this is going to let you put things out of focus. So in other words, the ball could be in focus, and then the torus back here could be out of focus and blurry. That does increase the render time by quite a lot. So if you don't need it, or if you're going to Photoshop stuff later, it's going to make things kind of a pain. So unless you really need it, I would keep that off. Most renders that you would turn in for clients anyway don't want a lot of blur. Or if they did for artistic reasons, that's something that you could always Photoshop later anyway. The next tab over here, Environment Library. This is just picking different studios. So, well, also some HDMI images. So these are actual images of real places. So you can get realistic lighting from the sun or other studios and apply that lighting to your objects. I'll just show you one or two of these. So if I just drag this in here, you can see it changes the lighting completely. Let's do something. We were on soft light to begin with. Let's do, heck, let's download field. I put that in there. I do have the background turned off. Remember that it was set to solid color. So we're not going to see the background change unless I go back here and turn on environment. But you can see the reflections of the world even if you have the environment set to solid color. So keep that in mind. I'm going to change this back to soft light. I think that's a nice basic look. Okay, so that's it for the settings. I'm going to leave that as is, and let's skip over this one just for a moment. We'll come back to that. I want to do texture map controls. Let's fix the texture on this 2x4. So it's going to ask you to select a model to fix, and you can pick a projection type. It's automatically set to automatic. That makes sense. Let's try box and see what happens. Ooh, okay, already I'm getting better results. So the wood grain is going with the board. I'm going to check out the other sides. Okay, that is not correct. So if I were to rotate this just like an object, you can see that we are getting different results happening. I'm purposely looking at the top and side at the same time just to see if there's anything I can do to get them both looking good. Okay, that looks like it's working. Okay, so the only thing I have to fix now is the ends of the boards. That's pretty cool. The end of the board has what's called end grain. You're not going to get that from the same texture. You would have to apply an end grain texture to the end of the board if that's what you wanted. But I'm actually getting good results with that, so I'm going to hit OK. So I always like to try the built-in methods first. If I had to, if box didn't work for me, I could also do planar and select a side to project from. It's maybe a little bit more complicated if this is your first time ever texturing anything. But I'm going to hit cancel because I did like the way that was. And you could always go back to appearance and select faces right here and drag these down to the faces. Then you would have individual control over that face all by itself and leave the other ones alone. So that is always an option as well. Okay, I wanted to show you one more thing, and that is how to customize the textures that you're using. So let's say I really like this powder coat blue, but maybe the texture is too rough, or the color needs to change, or maybe the texture needs to look like something else. So you can actually right click on any of these textures and edit them. You could duplicate it if you want to keep a blue one but have a similar one next to it. Maybe you're showing a client side-by-side examples of, you know, a little bit more texture and a little less texture and see which one they like. So you could duplicate and then edit the second one. I'm going to go to edit. Lots of options here. I can change the color. Let's go right over here. That's looking pretty cool. Okay. Change the scale. Watch the texture right here as I change the scale. If I make it bigger, now it looks like maybe the ball is much smaller than it's supposed to be. Or if I make this smaller, that texture gets much finer. It actually gets very hard to see below 50. But you can change the size of that texture without changing the object. Change the rotation of it. On something like this, that doesn't really matter too much. How rough it is. This might not be something that you see shown here, but when you render it, basically the roughness and reflectance are the values of how it reflects light. So think of it like rubber and metal. You know, if you want to take something that, you know, with roughness all the way down and reflectance all the way up, that's more like a mirror. Because mirrors aren't rough at all, they're very smooth, but they reflect quite a bit. If you take the reflectance down, now it's very smooth, but not very reflective. Think of something like maybe a wood floor. Well, maybe that's not a good example. That's a bit rough. Something like a plastic that's not shiny. You know, that's very, very smooth, but it's still not reflective. Like you can't see your face in the plastic. But if I turn roughness all the way up, this gets to something like tire rubber. So it's not very reflective at all, or not very smooth at all. The way it scatters the light is different. And reflectance, again, is just basically if you see a real reflection or not. It has nothing to do with the shininess of it. It's more like, can you see other objects off of its surface, like a mirror? Okay, so I'm going to leave roughness kind of right about there. Reflectance most of the way down. Usually you don't go with like all the way 0 or all the way up. It's always going to be some value of something. Hit done. Now the one like pine, this actually has an image built into it. So you don't see a whole lot of things to mess with right here, but if you go to advanced, this is where you get into options where you can load in your own textures. So you can download things from the internet or take your own photos or whatever, and stick them right in here. And the thing that Fusion does that I really, really, really love is it shows you the size of that texture. So this is a piece of wood that's 18 inches by 36 inches. That photograph covers that much wood. So if you were to take a picture of a piece of wood and then measure what's in the photo, you can actually go right down here and type in how big that texture is on an object. That'll give you the correct scaling here because you're drawing everything in Fusion according to actual dimensions. So like if you have a 4-foot board, but your photo only covers about 8 inches of an image, then you could type in that 8 inches right here and it will scale it perfectly to that. It's not going to make it too big or too small. It's going to make it fit realistically. So that's really, really cool. You can control the tiling of it, how it repeats from edge to edge and all that stuff. But you could also click right here to change the image itself. So if you had a custom piece of wood that you wanted to put in there, that's how you would do that. Bump, that's the bumpiness of the image here. So you'll see when we render, you'll see little bumps kind of like this, but it's wood grain bumps because it has this bump pattern to it. And roughness right here again is the how smooth the surface is. So you've got a lot of control under there, but they kind of hide that from you so that you don't get overwhelmed, which is really nice. Okay, last thing, I do want to put a decal on this wood, or maybe on the ball. Let's do it on the ball. That'd be kind of fun. So let's go to decal right here. This is our last thing. I'm going to pick a logo that I have right here. And it's going to say, okay, we've got the logo. It's a PNG. I've got some transparency in there, so it'll fit like a real decal. I'm going to pick the face. And now I get to move it around and get it looking how I want to get it. Right about there. That looks pretty good. And you've got a bunch of options to change the opacity of it, the angle, the scale, whatever, if you want to flip it. And that looks pretty awesome. Yeah. Okay, so we're going to kick off a render now. Skip over this in-canvas render. That is just for this screen right here, and then you have to kind of screenshot it to save. Let's go straight to render. This is going to give us a high-quality image that saves somewhere on your computer. Okay, we've got a bunch of presets up here for basically size and quality. I think it defaults to custom, or at least it does on mine. Web, mobile, print. Print is going to be kind of the highest quality that you can get, and like this one is 8.4 megapixels. It's going to take a very long time to render depending on your scene and how many reflections and stuff you have. But if you go to web or mobile, these are going to be the smallest and they will render quicker. And if you're just going to email these around or post them on a website or whatever, this right here is just fine. It also defaults to cloud renderer, which means you're going to hit render and it's going to render on a computer in Autodesk's servers. So it's going to render somewhere else. It's not going to use your computer to process the image. If you do local renderer, then your computer is going to process the images and it's going to save them out. I usually do local renderer because I've got a good video card, I've got a fast computer, I can handle it. If I do cloud renderer, it's going to cost me credits and you have to pay for credits. If I do anything that's under 1 megapixel in size, I go to standard. Now it's free and I can do it in the cloud. So if these are your options, that's not going to cost you any money and you'll get it in less than 10 minutes. However, standard quality is very pixelated. I recommend going with final, and that would cost me a credit. So I'm actually going to do this on my local computer. If I do advanced settings, I can turn up my quality to excellent, and I think I'm going to do that. Let's go for it. I'm going to kick off a render. I'm going to pause the video and come right back and show you what it looks like. Okay, the render is done. It's right down here. So if I hit this little plus sign, and that actually only took about 1 minute on my computer. So that was pretty good for a small image like that. Okay, so noticed in this torus right here, we can see the reflections of the other objects. That's awesome. The wood grain looks pretty cool. I can see the bump that's in the purple ball, and looks pretty nice. It is a small image, so you know, I can't zoom in any closer and get a better look at it. So I'll show you what I mean. That's full size right there. Okay, if you want to save this out to your computer, you can do a couple adjustments right here and then re-render, or you can just hit download right there, and it's going to take it out of this panel and save it somewhere on your computer. So if I do this, I can just go to right to desktop and give it a name. That's my scene. You've got a couple options for, well, okay, I lied. You get PNG. You can save it as a PNG, which is an uncompressed file, so you're not going to lose any quality. And hit save. Now it's on your desktop. Okay, just for kicks, I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to pan this way, and I just want to see if I can get like a really high quality render and how long that takes. So let's do a 1.3 megapixel all the way up to excellent and render that. I'll tell you how long this takes. Okay, so this render has now taken about 25 minutes, and like I said before, my computer is fairly decent, so to take 25 minutes, that's telling you something. The reason it's taking so long is because not only did I increase the image size by almost twice, but most of the image, about 80% of the image, is either a bump map or reflections, mirror reflections. Both of those increase render times dramatically. So anytime you have close-ups of reflections or close-ups of texture like you see in the purple ball, that's going to increase your render time significantly. So either show them from far away, decrease the amount of reflectiveness or bump, or decrease your image size. If you can go without reflections or bump, then do it. If you absolutely need it, you know, just plan on long render times, or maybe just pay for the cloud render because that does go a little bit quicker. So let's check it out. It just finished. I'm going to go down here and let's preview this. It should look pretty amazing. Wow, very sharp reflections right there. Let's take a look at actual size. This looks a whole lot better than the other one, although I do still see some kind of graininess right up in here in the reflections. But let's download that and save that as scene 2. And let's take a quick look side by side and we'll wrap this video up. So on the left, you see the one that took 25 minutes, and on the right, you see the one that took about 1 minute to render. There's a huge difference between the two. The last thing that I want to note before I let you go is notice the gap right here between the top of the ball and the top of the screen, and also the bottom of the ball and the bottom of the screen. There's some space there that you do not see here in Fusion. Okay, so it actually crops the image a little bit different, and that was because of my scene settings down here. I did viewport aspect ratio, which means it's looking at the horizontal edges of the screen. If I was to go to 16:9, I could actually see the frame of where it was cropping my image. So I can actually zoom out a little bit like this and frame up my shot, and my render will be exactly that. So that's something to keep in mind. Hope you like this video. Hit subscribe to see more.